TGCRequiem. This is a deck tech for black-red or Rakdos Reanimator. This is a deck list that has had a couple 5-0s in dailies, or not dailies, but leagues lately. And I've noticed it a few times in the past as well. So seeing a couple more recently just made me want to try it out. I'm a big fan of Goryo's Vengeance. Just one of my favorite cards to play with. Return target legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Ideally, those legendary creatures that you are returning to the battlefield are pretty powerful, since you only get them for like a single turn. And that would be Grizzlebrand, and if we slide over a little bit, we have a few Emrakuls sitting in there as well. So you've probably seen me play, or if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me play Grixis Reanimator, something I play somewhat regularly. One of my favorite decks to play. Not necessarily the most competitive, but it's competitive and pretty good. It focuses on using blue cantrips to get to the combo as quickly as possible. This version does not do that. This version plays a more interactive game with Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Fatal Push, Collective Brutality, and some Murderous Cuts, Liliana, to kind of interact throughout the game, but also Blood Moon. And so the hope is to kind of make it just hard enough for your opponent to buy yourself time to Goryo's Vengeance and a Grizzlebrand or Emrakul, or to Through the Breach one of them. Pentad Prism replaces the Simian Spirit Guides, essentially. Now granted, there would normally be 4 Simian Spirit Guides, but Pentad Prism is pretty good because it gives you a way to ramp ahead to potentially turn 3 Through the Breaches. But it also gives you the ability to cast stuff under your own Blood Moon with black, such as Goryo's Vengeance, so you don't have to necessarily wait till you have a black mana source to cast your Goryo's Vengeance if you have Blood Moon. But it also allows you to get to a point where you can actually hardcast Grizzlebrand. I don't want to say regularly, but a lot more common here than it would be in another deck, since this kind of can ramp you. It only takes 6 lands plus a Pentad Prism to get Grizzlebrand on the battlefield. The core of the deck is take one of these big crazy creatures, try to put it in the graveyard. Once you get in the graveyard, Goryo's Vengeance it. And so you have Faithless Looting, which is draw 2, discard 2 cards with the ability to be recast using flashback from the graveyard. You have Cathartic Reunion, which has as an additional cost to casting it, requires you to discard 2 cards, and then you get to draw 3 cards, but again, the additional cost to cast can't be countered, so you can discard those cards even if your opponent counters the draw card functionality. Similar with Collective Brutality, escalate, discard a card, so you can choose multiple modes. Well, if you choose to escalate, they can't counter the discarding portion of it, where you discard ideally one of your creatures. So this is another one of the discard outlets. Liliana of the Veil is another discard outlet. And then finally, Thoughtseize. So primarily you're going to use Thoughtseize on your opponents, but the reason you have a 4-2 split in terms of Thoughtseize over Inquisition is Thoughtseize can be used to discard your own Grizzlebrand or Emrakul, since it says target player, not necessarily target opponent. One other thing, the deck lists online were running Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and I unfortunately just got rid of the Chandra, Torch of Defiance I had because I picked it up for like 13 tickets or something a while back, and they were up to like 40, and I hadn't been using it, and I didn't want to re-pick it up at 40, so I just replaced it with a Pack Rat. And Pack Rat just gives you yet another discard outlet, but also a way to kind of fight through or essentially provide an alternate route of attack. And one nice thing about this is it's very powerful or strong under a Blood Moon, because it's going to be a lot harder for your opponent to keep up with your creatures, and if you have a Pack Rat, you can kind of just make it bigger, add one every turn, and they may not be able to keep up with that while they're under Blood Moon. It may restrict their mana. The other thing with it is that post-board games, your opponents are going to remove a lot of removal because they may not have anything that really interacts with Grizzlebrand or Emrakul. And so, if they don't see a pack rat in game one, it's got the potential to be pretty strong as a way to win through graveyard hate in the post-board games. And I wouldn't mind even finding room for a second one out of the sideboard. It's possible it'd be better than a Dreadbore, but as it is, it's what we have. So, again, we kind of talked about the Disruption Suite. Blood Moon, just very powerful card against a lot of decks in Modern. It's very common for decks in Modern to run 3 colors, sometimes more. But the decks that are running 3 colors, they're typically aggressively fetching shock lands, dual lands, and so if you can land a Blood Moon on them, it can really, really just pinch them out of being able to even compete and give you, so it's in a way you're cutting out the Serum Visions, the Sleight of Hands, the Izzet Charms from the Grixis version to play this interactive game. But part of the reason you're able to do that is if there's a lot of decks where you can slam a Blood Moon, and when you slam the Blood Moon, it just gives you, if not all the time you need, a good piece of time, a good chunk of time to draw into what you're looking for. And it's not like you're without card manipulation between the 4 Faithless Lootings with Flashback and the 2 Cathartic Reunions. And I think, I'm not to say that Pack Rat is or isn't good, because, it certainly can be good in certain matchups. Chandra Torch of Defiance, if you had Chandra Torch of Defiance, is yet another win condition. If you were to run that over the Pack Rat or something else, but it also is a way to draw cards. So that's the main deck. For the land, just note that there are 6 fetches. All of them are black fetches because when you're under Blood Moon, all the rest of your lands are mountains, so you want to make sure you can get to these 6 swamps because you would really like to have a swamp paired with red. Note that also nothing in your deck costs more than a single red, so you're not dying to, or you're not needing to really stress yourself out to get 2 reds. Focus on getting your swamps and a single red to start, and you can go from there. I think that's it on the main deck. If we move to the sideboard, Collective Brutalities are a great sideboard card. If you're worried about Cathartic Reunions not being very effective due to counter magic, Collective Brutality can sometimes replace those. They basically fill the same spot on the curve. They can't be countered, but where Cathartic Reunion, you may be casting it on the hope of drawing the 3 cards. If they counter and you just discard 2 cards, that can be painful because you just lost your Cathartic Reunion plus 2 cards. Whereas Collective Brutality, at least you're getting other, other interaction in terms of maybe draining your opponent some life or making them discard a card. Again, as we're trying to be a little more interactive, we can kind of handle a couple Damnations and Anger of the Gods. Those basically give you the ability to, those actually give you the ability to keep up with the go wide strategies. You have a little more interaction to kind of delay them, plus Collective Brutality can kind of kill them. Grim Lavamancer would be good for, helping fight those little creature decks, but then you have a few sweepers. Anger of the Gods especially excels against, Kitchen Finks, Collected Company style decks and or Dredge. And Damnation excels more against like a Merfolk, Eldrazi Tron, that style of deck. And so we've just got a 2-2 split here. The list that I originally based this off of had 2 Shattering Sprees, which is a single red, replicate, destroy target artifact. I replaced the second Shattering Spree with by force, destroy X target artifacts. I understand that Shattering Spree is more mana efficient, but Chalice of Void is a thing, and so if your opponent drops Chalice on 1 on you, and all you have is Shattering Sprees, you're just basically boned. And so by force allows you to destroy a Chalice on 1. On 1. And then it's also still good against like Affinity or a not Amulet. Oh my gosh, what's the deck called? Lantern Control. As you can, essentially sink all your mana into it to destroy a lot of artifacts. Unfortunately, it doesn't destroy enchantments. something black-red has always struggled with and Grixis has struggled with. None of those cards are really suited well to destroy enchantments. You really have to kind of count on your Thoughtseizes, Inquisitions to get you there. Alright, finally, we also are running a couple Nihil Spellbombs as Graveyard Hate, great against a lot of decks, Dredge, Grixis Shadow, Storm, just good against a lot of different decks. Even to some extent might be good against like a John D style Abzan type deck. Rakdos Charm also works as a way to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. It's also a way to destroy an artifact. You have Shattering Spree by force. I just would prefer more options on 2, which is why we have the by force again over that Shattering Spree. And then each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So if you play against a deck that goes wide, you often will have these games with Goryo's Vengeance decks where you maybe get to fire in with an Emrakul, but your opponent has 5 life left over, 3 life left over. And so, think about the standard fetch shock. So they put themselves to 17, you Emrakul, get an attack in for 15, it gets exiled. Maybe that's all you kind of had as your last gasp. It gets them down to 2. They're able to re-stabilize with a couple creatures. Rakdos Charm, each creature deals 1 damage to its controller. And, that's a way to kind of finish your opponent off. Dreadbore, destroy target creature or planeswalker. I'm not sure that I love the Dreadbore. I'm sure the person who put it there had a reason for it, but to me it seems like Terminate might fit the bill better. But granted, Liliana of the Veil is pretty big right now, so I could also see Dreadbore being pretty strong. Slaughter the Games can't be countered by spells or abilities. Choose a non-land card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, library, or any number of cards with that name and exile them. That player shuffles his or her library. So this is a great way to try and fight combo decks that you're not faster than. You can name Ad Nauseam or Living End or something like that. And then ideally that is going to let you kind of win at your leisure. And so the fact that it can't be countered is great because it can get through like a Pact of Negation. You can also use it to go after your opponent's, cryptic commands or some specific card that they have as a trump against you. So 1 of for that. And then finally, Quicksilver Amulet. And I've actually, the original list for Grixis I saw ran a couple of these. But I've myself gone down to just 1 as well, and this list was running just 1 also. I think that typically is the right number. It's a 4 mana artifact, and you can spend 4 mana to put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So when you play a deck that's heavy with Graveyard Hate, you can bring in this Quicksilver Amulet, maybe cut some of your your discard and reanimation spells to bring in a Quicksilver Amulet. Gives you yet a 5th option to bring in a creature without having it go through the graveyard. And the benefit of Quicksilver Amulet is when you put it onto the battlefield, unlike Goryo's Vengeance and Through the Breach, which exile or sacrifice a creature at the end of the turn, if you Quicksilver Amulet down a Emrakul, that Emrakul gets to attack turn after turn until they can handle it or they lose. So pretty great. One other thing I'll touch on just briefly before we go, Goryo's Vengeance and Through the Breach are both arcane spells, so they have this little ability on the bottom, Splice onto Arcane. Basically, as you cast the spell, as you cast an arcane spell, you can splice an arcane spell onto it. So if I were to cast a Goryo's Vengeance for 2 mana, I could, while I do that, splice a Through the Breach onto it for 4. So if I had 6 mana, I could cast the Goryo's Vengeance, splice the Through the Breach onto it, and and so it's kind of like it's a way to potentially what am I trying to say here? It's a way to try and get double value, if you will. So the problem is the first spell gets countered, the second spell gets countered. it's not necessarily more mana efficient or anything, but maybe to some cases it could be. For 6 mana, you can Goryo's Vengeance and Through the Breach together, and that would get you, a Grizzlebrand out of the graveyard and allow you to throw in a Emrakul. And maybe you wouldn't have been able to do both for 7. Maybe you only had 6 mana. So, there's some things like that. The other thing is occasionally you can try and, do a spell on your end step. The weird thing about the Splice is it's not like the second spell's gonna necessarily be that great. So if I were to like cast a Goryo's Vengeance and splice a Goryo's Vengeance on it, again, if they counter the first spell, the second spell gets countered automatically. So it's a thing just to be aware of. It's more commonly comes into play when you're playing like the Desperate Ritual that is also an arcane spell, and so you can kind of like pump for mana and have Goryo's Vengeance attached to it, and then they have to make that decision of whether or not they want to now counter your Goryo's Vengeance or your ritual. Oh my gosh, Desperate Ritual. And then if they counter your Desperate Ritual to protect against Goryo's Vengeance, you still have the Goryo's Vengeance to cast from your hand the next turn. So just something to be aware of. Again, probably not super common in this deck, but like in the Grixis Reanimator deck that I run, and unfortunately I think it's a little messed up here, but I run like Peer Through the Depths, which is another arcane spell. So there's ways to kind of use this, just something to be aware of. That's it. Hopefully you enjoy and have fun throwing those big old crazy creatures at people.